Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode Around the Fire on Spirit Reflections. My name is Fred Gouveia, and if you're here for the first time, Spirit Reflections is an ongoing conversation series in English and Portuguese about people's personal and spiritual journeys, the tools that they found along the way, and how those tools shaped who they are and the work that they do today. We interview artists, philosophers, scientists, and religious people of all backgrounds to understand a little bit more about themselves and in the process get to know ourselves. So please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Spotify, and leave your comments below on which guests and topics you'd like us to go deeper here around the fire. And today's conversation is going to be with Dan Cohen. We've had him before, and if you'd like to see the full interview of the first episode we did with Dan Cohen about his own personal and spiritual journey and how he got to family constellations and the alchemical constellations that he's been doing for many years with his partner Emily, take a look at the video. The link is below in the description. But for today's topic, we're going to jump right to it and talk about perpetrator and victims. So in conflicts of wars and family conflicts, who is the victim? Who is the real perpetrator? And how did Bert Hellinger in his work observe this dynamics between perpetrators and victims? And how can we gain some understanding about what's happening in the world today through the lens of family constellations as they've observed how perpetrators and victims behave? So type your comments below, ask your questions, and we'll make sure to answer them in a future episode. And now, without further ado, welcome, Dan.
Hey, welcome, Fred. Good to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's always great talking to you.
Likewise, Dan. Thank you so much. So let's get right to it. We're in 2023 in November when this is being recorded. War has broken out in the Middle East. Israel, Hamas, Ukraine, and so many places in the world are seeing conflicts. And I just wanted to ask you point blank, how do you see perpetrator victims in these conflicts with your understanding in family constellations that you've gained?
Well, I think the key insight that I took from Bert Hellinger when I first came into contact with family constellations at a time when I was really looking for a missing tool. I had worked as a peace activist and a social activist for about 20 years and had done so many things. I'd worked in the inner cities in the United States. I had walked through the West Bank and lived in Bethlehem on the West Bank in Palestine as a Jewish peacemaker. I had traveled to Germany and I had brought groups of Jewish American and German teenagers together and done different types of peace activism practices with young people, and had participated in political forums and educational forums and done different types of spiritual work and traced the religious traditions, both of the Western religions and the Eastern religions. And at the end of this 20-year cycle, the peace process between Israel and Palestine, which I had been so devoted to, just completely fell apart around 2000, 2001. It came to a dead stop and has never really been revived over the last 20 years. And this was the time, as that was unfolding, that I recognized that there needed to be a different tool. There had to be some other way, picking up the other end of the stick of looking for what were the dynamics in these conflicts that made them so difficult to resolve and so easy to just repeat in generation after generation. And so I was looking and I came across the work of Family Constellations and Bert Hellinger. And when I read the seminal work that Bert Hellinger had written, Love's Hidden Symmetry, right at the beginning, there's a sentence that says that the worst atrocities and injustices are committed by people acting in good conscience. And he spoke about guilt and innocence, the feelings that we have inside, and that a feeling of innocence and righteousness, in a way, is the license to commit violence and atrocities against others. That from a position of innocence, we're willing to do to someone else what would otherwise be abhorrent to us. And we can see this in divorce proceedings, in marriages. We see this between parents and children. We see this in social situations or societal situations, in communities, in the way people vote, and then, of course, also in large national conflicts, that the tendency to defend one's position, to claim innocence, is itself the igniter of violence against others.
So right in the beginning of Love's Hidden Symmetry, the seminal work by Bert Hellinger, you saw this passage where he comments between guilty conscience versus innocent conscience. And for the sake of wanting to belong, we will defend our innocence by basically repeating what our ancestors have done for the sake of belonging to them, even though it might be wrong. But as long as we are emulating and repeating that, we stay innocent because we continue to belong. Is that part of it as well?
Yes, it is. This innocence generates a feeling of belonging. And when we belong, automatically, that means there's somebody else that doesn't belong, that often the ones that don't belong become a threat to us, or we perceive what they're doing as wrong or bad, or something that we need to defend ourselves from. And we see, we can see them through our own eyes, but we cannot see ourselves through their eyes because we have excluded them in a way that they are outside the circle of our belonging. And so these cycles of the ones who are attacked and the ones who become the attackers, they just keep rotating around. So the Germans after World War I felt that they were the victims, and so they become the perpetrators in the next generation. The Israeli Jews, many of whom were the victims in the generation of the Holocaust, then become the perpetrators against the Palestinians in the next generation. And this repeats on the personal level and the family level, as well as on the collective level.
And how does that play out in an actual constellation group session, as observed by Bert Hellinger when he first saw the dynamics unfolding in his observations?
I mean, this one of the simplest illustrations of it is that if a married person would sit down next to him and complain about their partner, their spouse, Hellinger would always take the side of the spouse. In a way, whenever someone claims that they are the victim of someone else, he would always kind of show sympathy towards whoever was being accused. So an example, someone might say, oh, my father was an alcoholic and he abandoned the family when I was 3 years old. And my mother raised us heroically as a single mother. And Hellinger would say, oh, poor father, poor father. And then would set up a constellation that would reveal that the father, in one sense, abandoned the family, and in another sense, he had no chance with his wife, and that he was actually driven out. Right. And then she gets to make up the story of what happened. He's not there. He's gone. And so the story is he was a drunk who abandoned the family. And this is what the daughter knows. And right. In her heart, she also secretly belongs or unconsciously belongs to her father as well. So she both has her mother's story, but she is also in a hidden way sympathetic to her father. So Hellinger's words of poor father actually touch her heart, touch the place where she has that same feeling, but it's kind of buried underneath the story of her mother's innocence, that her mother did no wrong, that she was the good mother, the good wife, and he was the drunk and he ran off.
Right. Just like a one-dimensional aspect to the characters. She's the victim, the drunk father is the perpetrator, and that's that, right?
Right. And so he would always, that's just an illustration of it, but anytime that arose in any form, he's always interested in finding the strength in acknowledging one's own guilt. That the movement towards peace is not to say, oh, these are the bad people. They attacked us. They are immoral, or they'll do anything to us. But to recognize one's own role as a perpetrator in the situation, to be able to stand with one's own guilt and responsibility and the consequences of our action. And this opens up a whole realm of possibility that's not available when we're in the narrow bind of simply defending our own innocence as the ones who did no wrong.
Right. And you also experienced that in your own work in the Massachusetts prison. That was the basis of your book, I Carry You in My Heart, which, by the way, we also have the link below on how you can get it on Amazon, both in English and Portuguese. And I remember reading it. There's many afternoons that you spent there with the inmates where the perpetrator victim dynamic played out in the inmate's family. And you were able to step in with the representatives and find resolutions or different ways of looking at it. Does any particular moment of those periods that you spent there come to mind to illustrate this?
Mm-hmm. There's, most of the men that I worked with were very receptive to recognizing their own guilt. It was one of the benefits for me of working with the prison group is I wasn't working amongst people who were kind of the really good people who had done no wrong. Right. We had, situations where people wanted to face a representative of the person that they had killed. There's a story in the book of one of the men, Billy Simpson, who had been involved in a murder. He hadn't committed the act, but he was a drug addict and was robbing a bar at closing time, and he was guarding the door. And his partner in crime stabbed the bartender to death. It was supposed to be a robbery, but it turned into a robbery murder. They were both caught, and in those circumstances, even though Billy didn't actually attack the bartender, he is convicted as if he had, and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And we did a process for him where he was able to come into contact with this bartender and really take on the feeling of his own guilt and responsibility. And he devoted himself to being a peaceful person from then on, because he always felt the victim with him, and the victim's message to him was no more victims. That the way that he could best hold his sense of responsibility was to keep the victim with him in such a way that there were no more victims. And he actually told a story about an earlier time, years before I met him, when he was at a different facility, where some of the inmates had planned to do an escape, and they were going to attack the guards, and they were going to try to make a break for it. And Billy wanted nothing to do with it. He just hid out in his room. He was on his cot, and he heard all the commotion going, and the yelling and the violence occurred. And he heard one of the corrections officers screaming, "Help, help," as he was being attacked. And in that moment, Billy felt the victim of his crime with him, the presence of the man that he had killed. And it was almost as if he had been forced out of bed by the spirit of this man to go save the life of the correction officer. And he resisted it momentarily, but the force was so strong, you must do something. And so he got out of his bed and left his room and pulled the other inmates off of this guard and saved the man's life. And this was an example of how being close to the victim as his perpetrator actually served him to be a peacemaker.
Got it. In a way, he's redeeming his own conscience of that act to himself by following that, obeying that strength, that it was as if it came from the spirit of the victim themselves, calling him to prevent another murder, right?
Right. And if he had excluded that victim, if he had been in the stance of, well, I didn't do it. My partner in crime, he was the one that killed him. We were just going to do a robbery. I didn't mean to do it. It wasn't my fault. That actually weakens him and puts him in this kind of narrow band of helplessness where he loses his agency to act. But in this case, even though he hadn't committed the violence, but he created the situation, he went into that situation with this person knowing what they were doing, and he took full responsibility for it. That brings the victim close, and that allows the victim perpetrator bond to serve him to be able to do things as a peacemaker, an impossibility that wouldn't be possible in the other scenario.
Got it. I was told once of a story that Bert Hellinger visited Fordham University in New York, and he did a workshop about perpetrator victims, and he asked people to come from the audience to stand in as representatives of the victims and perpetrators of the Holocaust. And after a while, they simply stood in one line facing each other, and they just convulsed into tears and hugged one another. And I wonder if you observed anything similar in live workshops that you facilitated regarding the Holocaust and this period in history.
I did. I actually I was the event organizer for that.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. We're
that
talking with the
event
right person then.
at Fordham. But I'll tell you of another situation which really stands out to me, which was in Stockholm. I did a workshop, and there were a number of Swedish Jews were there who had come from the white buses. They had been rescued during the war as children and resettled in Sweden, and they had grown up there. And that these were the children of those Holocaust survivors, and other Swedes, and there were some Germans, and there were some people of Arab descent that were there, and so it was quite a mixed group. And we did this timeline where we kind of went back. I put in a representative for Moses, and I put in a representative I can't remember them all, but for the sources of Islam and Christianity. And then we brought forward Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and I moved representatives in front. And we ended up with a representative for, at the time of the Holocaust, of the ovens of Auschwitz. And we had a representative for Judaism and a representative for Nazism. And they stood behind the representative for the ovens of Auschwitz, the gas chambers and the crematorium. And in that place, the Jewish representative was the victim, weak and defenseless and innocent. And the representative for Nazism was the perpetrator, militaristic, violence, hateful, very easy, willing to kill. And they faced each other in this kind of death stare. And then I had to move forward and stand in the crematorium at Auschwitz. So they actually stood in the fires, and then they stepped out, and they came to post-war Judaism and post-war Germany. And it was as if the fires in Auschwitz were an alchemical fire of transformation. And Judaism that came out had acquired some of the qualities of Nazism. It was militaristic. It was thick-skinned and defended. It took the trigger end of the gun. It had this sense that we are no longer going to look down the barrel end. We're not going to look into the barrel of a gun. We're going to be holding the trigger, the business end of the gun. And we won't put that down again. And we will do whatever it takes to protect itself. They had become steel. And the representative for Germany that came through was a pacifist, was compassionate, was soft, nonviolent, and had somehow been melted in those fires. And when you look at modern Germans or modern Germany, it's kind of reflective of people who are kind of bend over backwards to be kind and understanding and inclusive of everybody. And anything that hints, any slight smell of Nazism, they turn and reject like immediately. And so these fires had been, in a way, alchemical fires, where the victims of one generation became the perpetrators of the next, and the perpetrators of one generation became the not exactly victims, but the innocent ones.
Right.
Very careful to always maintain a position of innocence, to do no harm. And, we see that, we see playing out in the Middle East where, Germany took the most of the Syrian refugees. They took several million Syrian refugees. They just felt like we just have to open our doors. We can't reject the victims of that war. And of course, the Israelis are the toughest kid on the block. And unfortunately today they are in a vengeance killing mode, where they are, wreaking destruction on the ones who attacked them. They are doing a big time 10x payback for what's been done for them, but also so staunchly defended. It's been very difficult for them to find a movement towards any kind of resolution of this conflict. So, of course, it will keep erupting until it finds a resolution.
So the bonding of victim and perpetrator in the heart allows for conflict to be resolved, or at least lessened to some extent, right?
Yes, if there's a way that that as this process occurs of innocence, victims in one generation to guilty perpetrators of the next, that the guilty perpetrators of the next are taking out their violence against people who didn't commit the original crime. They're taking vengeance. So in a way, the Palestinians are standing in for the Germans, for the Nazis. And so they are receiving the punishment that accrued from the Holocaust experience. The resolution is to really allow ourselves to bring in the consciousness of the ancestral field, just as my friend Billy did when he had the consciousness of the one who had died. The message of the one who died is no more victims. And so in a place of innocence, and the thing is, the Palestinians are doing the same thing because their grandparents were displaced in 1948. So it's not so simple or one-sided, because the Palestinians are also clinging to their innocence and defending their grandparents and wanting justice for their grandparents, the same as the Israelis are looking to the Holocaust and defending their grandparents. In a constellation, we would bring in the representatives for those ancestrals and really activate the ancestral field. So in my orientation, these aren't just role players. They're not just kind of showing us from a systemic view the ley lines, but we can actually work with ancestral consciousness and receive insight and messages from these past generations, and they are seeking resolution. What they want most is for peaceful life, ordinary life, to be able to continue. They are very rarely still engaged or enraged in these cycles of revenge and an attack. They really want a peaceful resolution. So if we can work with that ancestral consciousness, it actually creates an alchemy in the heart of the individual, where the traumas of the past generations get transformed in the heart to nourishment for the next generation.
So the activation of the ancestral field is so that the current players in this role of the conflict can tune in or receive from their ancestors that they are trying to avenge many times the wisdom and the information that they can download in their hearts today, so that they can see whoever they are fighting against as also a reflection of themselves, and hopefully in that movement bring greater peace and empathy in their hearts, so that the weapons can be put down and the dialogue can resume somehow, right?
Right. I mean, I've had this recurring image of the Israelis pouring in ambulances and doctors and nurses into Gaza right now, withdrawing their troops and activating their very robust medical infrastructure, and just sending convoys of ambulances and medical supplies and doctors and nurses into Gaza City, and to start to tend to the wounded. And what would that do? What would that do to this whole situation if Israelis and Palestinians, instead of shooting bullets at each other, were actually joining together to bandage the wounds and to save the children and the mothers who are suffering so badly? Of course, it's a fantasy. It's not about to happen. But in my mind, I see these a convoy of ambulances and medical supplies coming from Israel into Gaza, and what would that look like?
And if you had no limitations, and if you had Bert Hellinger's spirit here present amongst us, seeing this, observing what's going on, well, what do you think he would do? Would setting up a massive constellation with people, physically and virtually, somehow would it contribute through a type of resonance to the situation, or is that
Well,
fantasy?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, Bert was not a peacemaker. He didn't really believe in peace.
Oh, really?
He didn't. He said, "War is the father of all things," which is an old quote from Greek philosophy. He would just say that the force of the war is a greater force, and that these wars happen, and that that the peacemaker is it's a childish fantasy to think that wars will not occur. That
Like
people,
magical thinking.
right? That people fight around borders. That it's always about borders, and as long as the border is not settled, there's going to be a war. And this is a place where the borders have not been settled. Any place in the world where there are people and there's not a border, it's an invitation to war. And he feels that he felt like war is intrinsic to human behavior, and that there will always be wars, and that he didn't really subscribe as much to peacemaking as I do. I don't. I'm not on the same page as him in every way. So I still have, I still hold in my mind, I hold some fantasies about what I would like to do. But I also, in a sense, having, it's been 40 years since I lived in Bethlehem, and here we are. So I recognize that the vision that I had has not manifested, that the opposite of what I wished for is what's happening. And I feel like I need to respect that a little bit, that my ideas are not, they're not carrying the day. Um, so
And perhaps that might stem from that quandary that Bert himself faced at the end of his time as a Jesuit priest, when apparently someone approached him and said, if you were to choose between people and principles, who would you choose? And he said, I would choose the people and
yes,
not the principles. And perhaps the work of a constellations facilitator such as yourself is to work on the individual level or the individual family to bring greater consciousness to a reality where there's less hatred, less grievances and thirst for revenge, so that the cycles don't perpetuate themselves, right? And hopefully that expands from an individual to a collective.
right. I mean, that's where I'm doing my work now. I'm working at the individual level because this is the place where I have leverage, and I'm changing people's lives every day.
Absolutely.
Working with the heart and the ancestral field, and then the the people that they are in contact with. They're, in theory, this could all be extrapolated out, but the they're just big forces. The forces of warfare, the economics of warfare, the money that is to be made through all this.
Right.
It's a big force, and it's more than I can intervene with. But at the human level, at the individual level, I can. Emily and I are going to be in Germany in a few months. We're going to be working at a site that has a history from the Holocaust, actually near where my father was after the war. And we'll be working with individuals who come there who are looking to find peace in their own soul, peace in their hearts around whatever they're carrying from their family lineage.
Beautiful. And back to the forces part, Dan, I recall somebody had mentioned that Bert Hellinger said this, that wars, they are from the gods. The gods are the ones that want wars, and those gods are politics, religion, territory, ideologies, and all those gods demand sacrifice, human sacrifice.
Yeah, they have the strength of gods that the weapons manufacturers, the politicians who just want power. We see today in the United States, very stark, this individual who only is concerned with his own personal power and having this light shown on him. But there's something that it touches in the dark hidden heart of so many people. They're his supporters, kind of wish that for themselves, and they project their own secret inner wish of being the evil slave master onto him, and he becomes a kind of salvation, a god for them. And so these are the people that gravitate towards political leadership. This is the same in Russia. It's the same in Israel, in the United States, in many countries. I know the former president in Brazil. I'm not aware the current president. I don't really know his background as well. But the former president also had this big ego stroke that it was all about him and his wanting to be a kind of demigod.
Right.
And it touched something in the people that supported him. So it's around the world, and behind them are the people that make money.
Like a messianic type of movement, right?
Yes, right. That there's some Messiah who's going to lead us to some type of glory where people can, people who are disempowered can feel that they will be empowered again. And it's a big force.
And I wonder if you could speak about that event at Fordham University at the time when Bert Hellinger was still coming to the United States doing these workshops. If there's any memories about that event that you could bring up in the context of what we're talking about, perpetrator victim here.
Uh, well, he did. We had a big room of people. I knew a professor at Fordham who was Armenian American, and so she was very interested in these dynamics of victim perpetrator because of the Armenian genocide and the official policy of the Turkish government that there was no Armenian genocide,
Right.
that the Turkey as a nation was innocent of the
Right.
genocide, and the Armenian people feel like they had been the victims of this genocide, and it's over 100 years now, and that argument continues. This was around 2003, I think, when I arranged this event. And so she promoted it on campus, and there was a lot of people, faculty members, and a lot of students and other people that knew Bert came. And I have a recording of it. There's a video of it floating around. I haven't watched it in a long time, but he spoke. He gave his kind of the talk that he was giving at that time about conscience, guilt and innocence, and the victim perpetrator bond. And then, yes, he did these kind of this piece where he set up these two lines, a line of victims and a line of perpetrators, and then did nothing and just saw the movements. Many people fell to the floor, but the ones that stood very gradually came together and showed that there's a bond of resolution that occurs between victims and perpetrators, that there's, if left to occur, there's a movement of resolution.
That even touches on the concept of forgiveness in constellations, right? Which is not your typical idea of forgiveness that we understand outside of it.
Right. Forgiveness in constellations, we don't. Sometimes children who have had difficult parents feel like they want to forgive their parents for what they have done. And in the constellation space, if a client tries to forgive their parent, we usually, divert that because it tends to take people out of order. That the one
Right.
forgiving ends up being above the one who is being forgiven, as if the good person is the forgiver and the bad
Right.
person is the one being forgived. And in constellations, we're always looking for balance in relationship. And so not to create this disparity and hierarchy between a good one and a bad one. But there is a further movement of forgiveness, which is really around acceptance, just a recognition that these things occurred and everyone who participated in them were human. And for the most part, any given human in any particular situation will behave more or less the same. So the victims, because of the conditions and the situations of their lives, these things happen to them. And the perpetrators, because of what went on in their lives, they behaved a certain way. But if you just took two individuals and you put them into the life of the other person, the innocent victim probably wouldn't still behave like an innocent victim if they were in the life of the one who's depicted or identified as the perpetrator. They'd probably act more or less the same. And this is a kind of a universal, is most humans behave more or less the same given the same set of conditions. And so if we can accept that these are the things that happened, and then somehow see beyond that there is a bigger life that we all share, that we are part of a larger human experience, that there is consciousness around us and moving through us, that we have ancestors who are active within us, and their consciousness in a way is influencing us, that we can create a kind of forgiveness, which is, I'm no better than you, and you are no worse than me. And what happened, and look for a healing movement that allows life to continue in a good way. That what life wants is to grow and to bloom, and that the movement towards forgiveness supports that.
Got it. So in Bert's eye, he wasn't a pacifist. He didn't believe that there would be such a thing as the end of wars in humanity is history in the future, right?
He didn't have he wasn't sympathetic to peacemaking. I don't know that he was making a prediction about the future. He probably wouldn't make that prediction. But if someone came to him and similar to the story about the father who abandoned the family,
Right,
if someone comes to him and says, I'm a person of peace. What can I do to create peace in my life?
right,
He would say, look at how you're a perpetrator. Look at your own violence. One of the things he did is, if there was a woman that came and sat down next to him who was very sweet, had like this really sweet face, he would say, "Oh, I can see you have a very sweet face. You must be filled with rage."
right.
And he'd want to work with that. And they would usually be a bit shocked to hear that. I've said the same thing with some of my students, the ones who were very sweet, to look inside. That sweetness is often a mask,
Like a
and
cover, yeah.
right, and that there's something that's not being acknowledged,
Right,
and to kind of make contact with the inner perpetrator that is being hidden by the innocent face, and to work with that. And so he wasn't a peace activist in that sense, but he was not a promoter of violence. I mean, he
of course.
wasn't a
Right.
violent person. He's always
It,
looking for the healing movement.
it just seems that he didn't really mince words and he was
Yeah,
misunderstood many times because of that, right?
right. Actually, at Fordham, I reminded of this when we were in the car traveling over to the event. He was always fearless, not mincing words, and just saying, what is there. And I told him not to do that. He's not an easy person to kind of, instruct or tell what to do. He didn't take kindly to that generally, but I said, you have to. I just want to tell you, don't be fearless, and don't embarrass or humiliate the host. That this is a professor at this university. She's invited her colleagues here to see this great man, and you got to behave yourself. So you can do your demonstration and say your things, but when you get to that point that you are just going to like blow it all up, don't do that. Don't have the next day that she's confronted by colleagues that say to her, "Why did you bring this guy here?"
Right.
And he didn't. He was actually very well behaved. I don't know how much it was. I think I had an
Sure.
impact on him. I kind of read him the riot act before the riot. But for the most part, I mean, the reason I said that is he would always do that. He would always come up with some provocative statement that just shook everybody to the core and left people just really questioning what had happened. And he did it for effect. It was positive in some times, and I saw him do it other times where I really cringed and felt like he
Right.
had gone too far.
So it was a therapeutic movement with the best of intentions that he had in mind, obviously, but not everybody was ready to take that much therapy in one blow, kind of thing. Was that
Yes, it always. I mean, he was always doing it with the intention to reveal something that was hidden that needed to be seen.
precisely? Yeah.
But there were times, he would say to a woman that had an abortion, he would look and right in her face and say, "You are a murderer." And he'd say it in front of an audience with, 200 people sitting there. So, I mean, there's a truth in it. I mean, if you look at a foundational level, that abortion is a taking of life. It is
Sure.
a destroying a life. So there's truth to it. And there's probably something that woman needed to face that she was denying to herself. Yes. And it's not the right setting for it. You know, to do
Right.
it in a public place, in front of an audience, and to say it with such a stark and provocative way, I found going too far. For me, it's
Got it.
going too far.
Got it. Got it. Because it seems like the spirit of his observations had a lot to do with the fact of seeing people, seeing ancestors, seeing the perpetrators, seeing the ones that are excluded. That in and of itself is a big part of the healing, right? In
Yes,
constellation work.
yes, he was. I mean, his perception was exceptional, and his understanding of these dynamics was exceptional. I mean, I'm kind of, you know, quibbling with some of his behaviors and some of the things he did in
Sure.
certain settings, but you know, I'm living the teachings every day. I mean, what I learned from him and the revolutionary perspective that he had was it's, you know, foundational for my life going forward. And so I subscribe to him as a man, as a therapist, as a teacher, and for what he was able to bring forward. And the criticisms are, you know, around the edges of, you know, he made
Sure.
this statement here or there. He did some things that I think he got a little carried away in certain places. But overall, the foundation is around blind love and enlightened love. That in blind love, people only are looking through their own eyes, and they tend to be looking through the eyes of their childhood self, their child self,
Okay.
and they're seeing the world through the lens of the moment when they were 5 years old, 10 years old, 15, whatever it was, when they realized they were on their own, and
Right.
that their parents weren't going to protect them. Their brother, who they thought they trusted, has betrayed them, or somebody else betrayed them, or someone died, or some catastrophe occurred, and they have this feeling, I have to do it myself now. I have to survive on my own. And in that moment, there was a truth to it, but you extend it out 30 years. And now that person is, you know, in their 30s and 40s, and they're still looking at the world through their 5-year-old self and still reacting from a 5-year-old's mind. I mean, people, we do it all the time. You could just look at the foods you don't like. Whatever food you don't like, you bit into when you were 5 and you spat it out. And now
Right.
the next 40 years, you still won't buy, you still don't like it.
Right.
This is how we do with everything. Relationships and love and our sense of self, all these things. And so enlightened love is being able to see through the eyes of others, to be able to see ourselves through the eyes of others, to be able to see the world through the eyes of others. We can move our mind's eye anywhere we want, and we can look through the lens of someone else's eyes, and it brings us into a much fuller sense of our own humanity. And when we're become fully alive as human beings, both in our body and our heart and our minds and our spirits, then we are able to live according to an evolutionary blueprint, which is far more expansive than our little 5-year-old, you know, feeling like, oh, no one's going to take care of me. I got to do it myself. That's a kind of blind love. And this enlightened love is much more expansive.
Do you think that that also is part of what fuels these personalities that strive for power and massive control, that in some ways they're basically replicating their 5-year-old selves and wanting to save the world, so to speak, and wanting to take over this or that place or those peoples?
Mm-hmm. We did a couple of years ago in my science, myth, and magic class. We did a collective constellation for Donald Trump before the 2020 election. And in that constellation, we could really see how strong the entanglement is with his mother. That if you listen to him speak, it's the voice of his mother speaking. He's identified with the father, the landlord, and the businessman, and that's kind of what he presents to the world. That's how he wants to be
The
seen.
external.
Right. But if you really listen to the syntax and the way that he speaks, he's speaking with his mother's voice. And his mother's was a victim of the Scottish landlord. She was a victim of what's known in Scotland as the Highland clearances, which was when a movement of landlords displaced by the tens and hundreds of thousands the Scottish people, who were at the time were the most magical and spiritually oriented
Right.
Gaelic people that had existed. They were lived with the land, the plants, the animals, with spirit, and their leaders were custodians of the people and the land, and had been for many centuries. And they were corrupted by the English, by the English mercenaries, and turned from custodial kings into landlords, and they displaced the people. They recognized that the land generated more cash when it was populated with sheep than with people living there who were sustaining themselves. And so the United States is filled with Scottish refugees. The whole Deep South, the whole red state constituents base, a large part are descendants of these Scottish refugees. And Donald Trump's mother, Mary Trump, was also a Scottish refugee living in Scotland before she came to New York, and they hated landlords. And when Donald Trump came back to visit his mother's hometown, they would have nothing to do with him because she had married a landlord, and he was a slumlord in New York City, and he was shut out. People wouldn't even talk to him because they felt betrayed by her marrying a landlord and then becoming a slumlord in New York City. I don't know how I don't know how I got into this story, but he is all of this, all this bravado and this domination is all coming through the victim perpetrator bond of his mother and his mother's family.
From being expelled from their home in Scotland.
Right. And so he is a child of a landlord and a woman whose family despised landlords. And he is trying to mediate. So at once he's a big landlord, and the other side, through his mother's voice, he speaks as the voice of the people. He's kind of speaking to the displaced, impoverished descendants of the Highland clearances. This is his voting bloc in these red states. And he's speaking to them like he's one of them through his mother's voice. And then he is also behaving like a slumlord who is just in it for themselves. That his grandfather owned brothels. So the original family fortune was made from brothels. So the most exploitative of men and women. And that was a base of the family fortune. And then it became real estate in New York. And now he has this persona where he is both the rich uncle who's going to take care of everybody, and he is also the enraged voice of the displaced. He feels into that perfectly. So anything comes out of his mouth, it doesn't matter. The fact that it's all lies is because he's feeling the black heart. He's just with the black heart and speaking in a way that resonates with the black heart of his constituents. And nobody wants to speak to them. They feel unseen and unheard, but he has their number, and through his mother and her lineage is able to connect with them in a really deep way.
And the black heart image is one of grief, a black heart of rage. What is that?
Let me feel into it. I'm surprised I used that term. Just give me a second.
No problem.
It's the feeling of the ones who had their lives destroyed, and now they want their vengeance.
Right. the black in mourning. We are mourning a tragedy, a loss. That's why our heart is black at the moment, like my T-shirt. And so we need to vanquish. We need to find some type of revenge in order to appease the heart, right?
Right.
That's
I
kind of
like the
what we're
January
thinking.
6th rioters. You know, we are going to storm the Capitol. We are
Right,
taking our country back. So it's been stolen from us. And now
right,
we're going to come take it back, and we're going to attack the seat of power, and we're going to take it back for the people. So it's both violent and vengeful, but it also has this feeling of we were stolen from.
right. In many ways, it is seeing through the eyes of the child that was hurt or first felt betrayed and trying to mimic that child's heroic, magical thinking that I can do this, I can solve for my whole family, I can take care of this. Let's storm the Capitol. Let's do something else along those
Yes,
lines, right?
it's a very childish, right. It's like an adolescence, a young adolescence feeling. And but it kind of mimics the naivete of the peacemaker as well. Like,
Right,
I'm going to go live in Bethlehem, and that's going to do something. Didn't do a damn thing. It was a great experience for me
right.
personally, and for the people I met. But it was. I thought at the time that these forces of war were built up from small individual movements, and that if you changed enough at the individual level, it would be reflected in the collective level. But at the collective level, it has an existing power structure which is pretty inoculated against the voice of the people. People
Right.
protesting in the street and all this stuff. It doesn't really penetrate through to the ones who are profiting, and doesn't slow them down in any way.
That's why perhaps the best way to continue doing the good work is individually. And as you're touching hearts individually, it touches on family systems individually. And that's all we can ever hope for at the end of the day, right?
I think so. I feel we actually have our soul and our body, and we have this. Our soul has an opportunity to have a human experience,
Yeah. Yep.
and that human experience is for the soul, and it's not really so much about changing the planet or changing the fate of
Right.
humanity. Turns out I'm not here to change the fate of humanity, but I am here to support individuals in coming to alignment with their soul's purpose, and to heal their hearts, to create alchemy in their heart,
Mm-hmm.
and to further and kind of enhance their human experience.
As
And I'm good
as
at that.
right, indeed you are, and
I found something I'm good
I
at.
can vouch for that. As what the quote that we have in our channel, Spirit Reflections by Teilhard de Chardin, that says we're not we're not humans living a spiritual experience. We are spirits living a human experience, right?
Yes, I agree with
Beautiful.
that. That's um, I'm become just very interested in the body and the heart and the mind and the soul, and harmonizing those uh, at the individual level, and then that individual will then influence some or many or a lot of people, uh, and that has a ripple effect.
Yep.
But ultimately, our souls and our bodies have a very short time here on Earth. The Earth is old, and it's going to be here for a long time. And we have this short time to experience being human. And so I'm most interested now in the people that come into a circle with me to enhance that experience for them, and to
Beautiful.
heal the entanglements with the victims and perpetrators of the past that are active in their bodies, that are kind of messing up their human experience, and connecting with those through quantum pathways, and to release the souls of past generations that are trapped in the body, and to be able to receive nourishment for a good life.
Beautiful. And the more we understand about quantum physics and quantum mechanics, the more we realize that there is no such thing as past, present, and future. So that when we disentangle someone through a work such as yours, it reverberates both in the past and in the future, and especially in the present, right?
Right. We have the two vectors. So our bodies, we live and breathe in the present moment, but the information, the quantum information field, is independent of space-time. So in a way, everything that's ever happened and ever will happen is available to us in every moment through the quantum information field. And we can access it through this part of our body, and actually through all the cells in our body. We are quantum beings as well as mechanical beings. This is the main finding of quantum physics is that there's a realm of actuality, the real world that we live in, of substance, and this came first, and then this happened, and that happened, and cause and effect. And then there is a second domain of potentiality, which is the information field, which is where everything, everywhere, all at once. And
Right.
Our bodies have access to both dimensions at all times. And for the most part, people are only in contact with actuality, not so much with possibility. So part of my work in doing this healing is to bring in the resources of possibility to support, the body's existence.
Perfect. And for that, I thank you very much for being in circle here with me on Spirit Reflections, Dan. And for those that have watched this, check out seeingwithyourheart.com, Dan's website. Also take a look at his book, which is beautiful. I Carry You in My Heart, Family Constellations in Prison. The information on where to find them is in the description below. Dan, big hug to you. Thank you so much.
You too, Federico. It's great talking to you. I really love talking to you. I really appreciate the chance to have this conversation, and I know we'll be talking again soon.
Absolutely. And I'll see you everybody in the next episode on Spirit Reflections. Thank you, everybody.